walk in my path. My faith, O Lord, is weak. Strengthen my faith. And if I ever doubt you or get lost in the way, bring me back to live with you all my life. Bring me back to live with you all my life. You are my Father, Lord. Your heart is full of love. You are my Father, Lord. Your heart is full of love.
In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen.
ممكن شديدة.
Yes. Connected.
بس لازم تشوفي يعني هتوبن ازاي؟ ممكن انت من بره مش كده؟ يا هاي تحطوه هنا يا مان، حطوه هنا باين. مش بيحطوا USB هنا يا ابونا؟ اليو نفتحه ازاي بقى؟ Yeah, Z, yeah. Recover. Yeah. Document. Sunday school material. Good job. And sermon PowerPoint, yes. Old Testament, OT. Good job. Go down. Job, yeah. Perfect. Slideshow. بس تمام. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. بنعمة ربنا هناخد كده جليمز على بايبل كاركتر، وبعدين هنبيك اب من البايبل كاركتر ده حاجة لحياتنا في السيرفيس يعني. ف I'm assuming you don't know the topic, right? Okay. So can I quiz you about the Bible character first? Okay. هو Bible character we name one of the year days after him. مش كتير في Bible character like that. يعني we have a certain day every year named after him. والday ده coming after 1 month. Very easy دلوقتي. After 1 month from now, day named after him. Thank you very much. انت رشيتها شكلك. انت اوكي اوكي 4 ايوب في اسبوع الالام. جوب وينزداي. Do you know, by the way, why we have Job Wednesday? Why we name this Wednesday after Job? Why? Why? Guesses. Why the Wednesday in the Passion Week we named it after Job? كده بالصدفة يعني ولا ايه؟ We read a lot of Job. لا هو by the way that day we don't read a lot of Job. واحنا we read بس الميمر بتاع أيوب اللي هو Job's memories بس. We don't read على فكرة the book of Job on Wednesday البصخة. مش كده يا ابونا؟ بنريد بس الميمر بتاع أيوب اللي هي السمري بتاعت حياته يعني. بس we don't read from the book of Job that day. بس why we name this day after him? الموضوع كده بقى صعب. His healing, yes. سيلفي انت رفعت ايدك؟ Yeah, what's the guess? Betrayed by his friends. خلينا نقول in general his passion يعني the pain he been through, it was pointing to our Lord Jesus Christ pain. So we consider him as an example in the Old Testament pointing to our Lord Jesus Christ in his pain and in his suffering. From the pain to the healing, from the pain and the death to the resurrection. Simply like that, okay? Anyway. فهناخد بس جليمز كده على جوب او بوك اوف جوب وبعدين نكمل. يس مريان. يعني should I wait till another يعني okay. طب لحد ما نتكلم اوف ريكورد كده. Job was a real figure or just one of those like myth stories in the Bible? Real figure ولا just a story? real. هو مين يقول real؟ أنا آسف. سوري أنا آسف يا سوري معلش. طب do you know if he is a real figure when he was in history? Like before, after? Before Noah? Any other guesses? Before Moses? ما هو أكيد طالما before Noah before Moses. Yes or no? Yeah, I think this is the most accurate guess. في ناس بتقول إن هو right before Abraham وفي ناس بتقول إن هو maybe little after Abraham يعني within the time of the patriarch Abraham, Isaac, Jacob with that time or maybe before Abraham. That most accurate guess yeah. يعني about 2000 BC, about 2000 BC. Okay, Job was descendant of Esau. Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Yeah, so يبقى after Abraham right away يعني حاجة few years. Okay. Marianne, are you okay? Okay. طب do you know who wrote the book of Job? Guesses? Yeah? Job. One of the guesses, by the way, we don't know definite answer, or at least me, I don't know definite answer, but Job, the other guess is Elihu. Do you know who is Elihu in the story of Job? Who is Elihu? اللي هو اليوث مان اللي اتكلم معاه في الآخر. The man who talked to him at the end. He was like a young youth. His name is Elihu. So يعني that's what they are saying. Maybe it's Job himself or Elihu who is the one who wrote the book. And they went even way beyond that and said there is a chance that someone else rewrote the book in a poem pattern. You know that book of Job, we consider it from the poem books, like it was written in a poem pattern. And they are saying that maybe Moses, he's the one who did that. But again, all of these guesses, we're not sure about any of them, but that's what they are saying, that it was written originally by Job or Elihu, but maybe Moses rewrote it again in a poem pattern. I'm wasting time. This is not count on me. طب do you know a book of Job how many chapter? أنا من كذا سنة أقول لحضرتك طولي بالك عليا. ما احنا طب ال 32 متقسمين ازاي؟ حد عارف او حد فاكر؟ It is very simple by the way. Book of Job, as much as you think in a complicated book, it is very simple book and very nice book and very enjoyable book to read through. والديفيجن بتاعت الشابترز بتاعته سهله very easy يعني هو mainly الستوري بتاعت جوب first two chapter. As you all know, Job was a very wealthy man, wealthy like beyond, okay, and very righteous man as well. And even when you read the first two chapter, it does. We're good now. هي مريم مشيت أساسا؟ Okay. When you read the first two chapter, ازاي ان هو كان عنده family. Do you remember how many kids he had? كان عنده 7 boys and 3 girls, total 10. وانه كان عامل لهم زي system ان هم يعملوا زي dinner each week or each day at one of their houses and invite all the sibling. We're good? Thank you. Invite all the sibling to the house. I kind of, you know, maybe we do that till now to encourage the link between the family. So he was very righteous, very wealthy, very wise, and he was perfect. Like he even he said that about himself. He said that about himself when he was struggling with his pain. Marcino, can you read the verse, please?
There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright and one who feared God.
Thank you very much. We talk about his real figure, about 2000 BC, and the whole book based on dialogue, and that's not nice about this book. It's either the dialogue between Job and his 3 friends from chapter 3 all the way till chapter 31, like about 27 chapter, 28 chapter. His 3 friends try to convince him with one thing: you are evil and you got all of this suffering, you got all of this pain because you are evil, you deserve that. Your only way to get out of this is to repent, which it was very harsh from them to him. And even the whole dialogue I mentioned about it tried to answer one question: why the pain? The whole book tried to answer this question: why the pain? Why we are suffering? And by the way, even at the end of the book, we couldn't get a definite answer why the pain. We got some answers, but none of them definite. Until now, we can't give definite answer why the pain. But the conclusion of the book, what he answered God at the end, will give us not an answer, but will give us kind of, you know what, just take it as it is. Don't discuss it too much. That's him among his kids, and then starts the bad news coming upon him. Muhib. That's what he responded to the temptation, to the pain at the very beginning. And as we all know from the story, he got like 2 main phases of the pain. First, he struck him with his wealth, with his stock, with his house, with his field. And the second phase was he struck him with his kids and health. Kids and health. So at the beginning, he said like, bless the Lord, he gave me, he took from me, bless the Lord, I came naked, I will come back naked, I'm fine with that. But he didn't continue this way. That his 3 friends, they start like, they spend like 1 week first with him, just weeping with him. And then they start, Amina please.
Why have you sent me so that I am a burden to myself?
Here Job starts shifting. Instead of the God give me, God took from me, blesses God, I came naked, I go back naked. He starts shifting here. What have I sinned? Why are you doing this for me? يعني بالعربي هل وضعتني لك عثورا يا رقيب الناس. بالعربي الآية دي هل وضعتني لك عثورا يعني حطتني هدف ليك وعمال تحط كل السهام عليا. Why? What did I do? Have I sinned? لأن هو he was seeing himself as a perfect man. And that what was his problem, by the way. Self-righteousness. He feels himself, I haven't done anything wrong, why do this for me? And who fed this feeling in Job? The three friends. Do you know their names? I was the first one. Do you know their names? شغال الله ينور انت التليفون ها. أليفاز وبندد صوفر صوغر مش صوغر. Yes. Those three names, and you can just tell from one of them saying to him, Tony, please. That's what they keep telling him. You're a wicked man, you deserve this, you need to repent to get out of this. You need to repent to get. For 27 chapters, the dialogue coming back and forth between Job and his friends, all around this kind of tone. You're a wicked man, you did evil in your life, you and your kids, by the way. They accused him even, your kids did evil, and that's why you are into this temptation, so you need to repent. And finally he told them, Daniel, Pierre. صح؟ طب ما واستنيت ليه طيب؟ all. معزون متعبون كلكم. That's the final thing. None of them was able to comfort him really for 27 chapters. This is a very nice art showing Job, the three friends just accusing him, and then the fourth one, the youth, the young man, his friend, then start to appear to the picture and start taking role in the dialogue. From chapter, I think, 32 all the way to 37. For 6 chapters, Elihu told them, you know what, guys, wait a second here, wait a second. You're destroying the man. Let's talk real. And this is the one they say, like, they resemble, Elihu, he resembled two who came the forerunner before Jesus Christ, John the Baptist. So they say that Elihu resembling to John the Baptist. Teddy? We shouldn't expect explanation. When we have pain, in many cases, we can't find explanation why we're having this pain. We may think about it, we may give some ideas, but for sure, definitely, sometimes, especially in this very extreme case, you can't really explain why is the pain for someone like that. But زي ما سنبول بيقول ما أبعد أحكامه عن الفحص وأمور عن الاستقصاء. At the end, the last 4 chapters, from chapter like 39 or 38 to 41, now the Lord starts talking to Job among the storm, and the Lord starts talking to Job. Bola? The nice thing about these 4 chapters, guess what? Tens of questions, one after the other. This was the first question. Tens of questions, and the Lord start asking him, were you where when I found the land? Were you where when I created this and this? When you were when I did this and this? Tell me if you have understanding. Did you understand all of this to come now and ask to understand what's happening to you now? Way beyond this happen. I did it. Do you understand it? You tell me, you answer the question. And for sure, Job has no answer to any of this question. And Job finally told him what? Mario?
I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees.
I've been working with you for years. By the way, they are saying when Job got tempted, he was about 6 to 70 years. And he was giving after the temptation how many years? Do you remember? Double. Double is 70, how much? 140 after the temptation. So I've been dealing with you for this age for 60 years, 70 years, but now I see you. Now I got it. After all these tens of questions with no answer, now I got it. I shouldn't question the pain I have. I shouldn't question the temptation you put me on. Because if I don't understand all of this, how come I will understand? Because this is kind of very minor. Very minor, right? Mariam? ما أبعد أحكام عن الفحص وأمور عن الاستقصاء دي في رومان 11:33. Finally, temptation got gone, and he restored all his livestock, all his wealth, and his house, etc. And he was giving 140 years of age after the temptation. So he was almost 200 years when he passed away. What I want to take from Job, do you have any comment about Job first? Any question? Anything you want to add? Okay. I'm just going like a glimpse about him and his book. But what I want to take out of his story is this one question. Tell me if you have understanding. Tell me if you have understanding. And us as a servant, how can we describe our relationship with God as a servant? First, how can we describe it, like by word? Can anyone like tell us anything? What's my relationship with God as a servant? Where am I from God as a servant? Am I an employee in a corporation? Anything? Tool in his hand. Okay, thank you. Tool in his hand. Nice. Steward. Wakil.
Jesus described it as unprofitable service.
Unprofitable service.
If you do everything,
Hmm.
you must say you are.
Okay.
This is a description of Jesus.
Amazing. Amazing. Ambassador. Perfect. Okay. What about if I ask you to describe this relationship in a digital formatting? We have so many computer science people here. Mario, can you describe it in digital formatting? Digital. Give it to me in a number. Like switch all of these words about my relationship with God to a number. I want to create one.
How about unlimited?
Unlimited. Huh? Zero? relationship كلها زيرو ولا مين اللي زيرو بالظبط؟ يعني I am amazed that the answer came from a dentist, not from one of the IT people. You're still discussing, huh? God is what? God is what? يا ابني ما love ايه بس خليك معايا بص على السكرين. God is what? He's the one. He is what? He is the one. Number one. And as Mariam said, we are the zero. And the secret in this relationship with God in service, صدقوني, to realize that we are zero. That's the secret. By the way, we say this many times. Yeah, we humble in service. It's only his hand. It's only his work. We are doing nothing. But the real feeling inside each one of us, sometimes there's gap between feeling we are a zero. Zero. Ocean and cup of water. with all your abilities, skills, talent, whatever, you name it. What will be the cup of water to ocean? Zero. Even if you have a bathtub of water, not cup, still zero. What about if you have one of these Minnesota nicest lakes to ocean? It would be what? Zero. If we are not realizing that we are a zero in our service, the one will not be next to us. If we realize that, oh, I am one or I am two, the one will go away. Okay, do it your own. You're a one, you're a two, you have your own skills, you depend on your power, do it your own. But unless we have this feeling inside us, we are a zero, the one will come next to us and will be what? 10. And 10 always the number of what? Number of perfection. Number of perfection. So our relationship with God, in this formatting, is based on we are working with God based on we are a zero. Maybe some of you heard about a book out there. The name of the book called With. This is the name of the book. Any one of you heard about it or have seen it? The name of the book called With. That's all. Okay. And this book talk about the different group of people and how they set up the relationship with God. So group of people deal with God based on we are under God. In a sense of there is rules, regulation, we'll follow it, we'll listen, we'll deal with God based on the book, which is very much the Old Testament way. We'll deal with God based on the book. We are under God. Another group of people above God. Above God means, yeah, God and church, it's all nice, by the way. But when it comes to my life, I have to plan it my own. Because I'm not sure if God knows about Google, and God knows about IT, and God knows about all kind of technique. So when it comes to my life, I have to handle it my own way. Under God, above God. There is a third group of people, they live from God. All the relationship with God about, give me. When there is exam, I will pray. I will go to the church. When I am in trouble, I will ask the help. Otherwise, I don't even remember it. From God. Fourth group, they live for God. So I'm pretending that I am sacrificing myself to God. In a sense of God needs me. God is waiting for me. So I'm sacrificing all my life to God. And these group usually, after a few years, they will give up. Above, under, from, for. But what this book asking the people to do, to live with God, to work with God, not above Him, not under Him, not from Him, not for Him, to work with God. That's what He's calling us to do, by the way. One of the most picture I would love when I see his picture resembling our Lord Jesus Christ putting his hand around my shoulder and walking with me, to walk with Him. But I will not be able to do that unless my feeling is I am. أنا هطلعكم هنا إن شاء الله النهاردة كلكم. Okay. Based on this, I'm gonna go through some bullets to show what's the difference if I feel zero or something else. Reliance, not laziness. When you serve and you know that you zero, all your relying on God, but it's not like He will do it. I have listened to prepare. That's fine. I'm gonna go there and He will do it for me. Relying on God, it's not laziness. It's not like I'm not gonna do my job checking on my kids, do the visitation, prepare my lesson, start preparing for the camp coming or for the retreat. But in all my work, at the end, I am relying on Him. Why? Because of the coming one. Evaluation, not expectation. The problem when I do my work, not relying on Him, guess what? I have expectations. And after 1 year from service at any field of service, I don't see fruits. What's going to happen to me? Disappointed. Because I did my work, I feel I did everything, but there's no fruits, there's no outcome for my service. I feel very disappointed and very mad and very unhappy. Do you remember one of the figure in the Old Testament? He got so upset because he put some expectation up to the limit. He told God, take my soul. No, جونا صح وإلايجا صح. إلايجا بس أنا الحقيقة كنت أقصد إلايجا يعني أو ده اللي محضره بصراحة يعني. فالإلايجا after his great victory he has some expectation. Oh, after this victory it's done. I won the battle and I won every battle. But to receive a message from Jezebel telling me that she's gonna kill me, no, take my soul. Why he at this moment he was relying on God or on his own hand? On his own hand. That's why the Lord told him, hey Elijah, there's something wrong here. Come out there. Let's talk. Let's fix this. When you rely on your hand, you have expectation, and if you will never get this expectation, you will feel disappointed and you will feel like, hey, take my soul, or you will quit your service, or you'll do something else. I just watched an interview recently. It was for Metropolitan Yusuf, the Bishop of Southern Diocese. And they were asking him about his service and how he started his service, the beginning, etc. And it clicked to my mind the story he told them, how when Bob Shenouda told him to come out of the monastery and go serve in Texas as a monk. So one of the bishop, I think, took him in his car. I think he said Ambahedra at the time. So Bishop Yusuf or Metropolitan Yusuf was very worried. And he was telling the other bishop, I don't know what to do. It's really huge to me, Texas, America, language, I don't know the systems there. So I think Bishop Hedra told him, don't worry, you're going there just to watch. And everything will be done in front of you. So Metropolitan Yusuf, he was monk at the time, thought seriously that it's a trick. Like Bob Shenouda sent someone else there to do the service, but Bishop Yusuf or Metropolitan Yusuf going to watch. He thought seriously this is, but actually the other bishop meant, don't worry, we are as a servant, we don't do anything, we just watch. What miracle happened before us? We don't do any actual work actually, because again, the zero will not do anything. And he's saying that that's his experience after over 30 years service in America here. He's metropolitan now. After all the expansion of his diocese, he's saying that's the real life happened before me. I don't do anything. I see things happening before me. I see things happening in front of me. I don't really do anything. We're watching his work. We're watching his miracles. So, reliance, not laziness, evaluation, not it's good to evaluate, by the way. Evaluate your service. That's very healthy. It's very required. Every now and then, evaluate yourself. That's where you should be or not. If something needs to be changed, if you need to do more work here or there, that's great. But don't put expectation, because if you put expectation, it will end up bad for you. Developer, not creators. Many times when we serve our kids, and I'm sure all of us experience this in our classes. Oh, I have one or two kids, really different character. I can't deal with them. I'm not sure what to do with them. I wish they are not there. Or sometimes I go to the class and my attention, after 5 minutes to kick them out the class, to live in peace the rest of the half hour. What I'm doing here actually, I'm doing the job of the creator, not the developer. My job when I serve the kids, developing them, not recreating them, because the creation is the job of the one. Why you are worried? Just do your thing. Do your thing. You be creative, not creator. And do your thing, but leave the change. You think, sometimes we hear this. ما اعرفش جبناها منين الكلمة دي اللي هي بالعربي ابن الهلاك للهلاك يدعى يعني this assigned to be out. We have no solution with this character. This is not your job. If you really believe that you work in this digital formatting, 0 next to the one will do it sometimes. And I'm sure many of you, especially the older servant, seen stories for cases and characters for years. They were kind of hopeless case. And after these many years, things change. Why? Because this is the work of the one, not of the zero. You as a zero, just do your best. Do whatever you can. But don't switch position to be creator and keep yourself as a developer. Caring, not burning. Keep in mind all of this, I put it related to this equation. Because each one of this, again, if you feel yourself as a zero and someone is doing the work, okay, you will never burn yourself. We burn ourselves when we feel like I have to do everything by myself. And what I mean by burning yourself is going over your life as a person. You need to have a spiritual life with God, your own life. Sometimes we burn ourselves as just under the name of we are serving. We have to care about our service. We have to give our service all what we can do, but do not burn yourself. Because again, at the end of the day, you are not the one responsible about this service. Who is responsible? The one. But remember the first one, no laziness. We're gonna do our work still, but don't burn yourself. Don't burn yourself. Developer, not creator. It reminds me with the story of Saint Mark. Do you remember when Saint Mark went to the first trip with Saint Paul and Saint Barnabas? What happened in this trip? First trip, Saint Paul, Saint Barnabas, and Saint Mark. What happened in Saint Mark quit in the middle. Who acted as a developer in this scenario, in the second trip? Who acted as a developer? Do you remember the second trip? Saint Paul said no. Saint Paul was very firm. Who quit us? The first one won't come with us again. But who acted as a developer? Barnabas. And it's nice to know that without Barnabas acting as a developer, guess what? We won't have Saint Mark going to Egypt. But Saint Barnabas said, hey, wait. Okay, leave him to me. I will take care of him as a developer. Because I believe that there is someone else who will do his work with this guy. He is the same guy who ran naked at the night of the crucifixion. He has a problem with fear. He has a big problem with fear. He fears stuff. But guess what? The work of the one with the zero next to him, which was Saint Barnabas, he became Saint Mark, who preached all Egypt, and he submit himself as a martyr at the end. Even at the beginning, he has a huge problem about fear. Caring, not burning. And it reminds me of a very famous story in the Bible. Martha, Martha, you care for so many things, but the need is for one. The need is for one. Don't burn yourself in your service. And again, I mean by burn yourself is overcome your own life. Sympathy, not crabbed. Sometimes in our service, the service goes us what we call it like naked. Sometimes we deal with tough cases. Sometimes we deal with horrible stories. Especially Abuna أكيد all day long be hear horrible stories and sad stories. Imagine if Abuna got influence with every sad story he hears. هي غندة لسه هنا؟ غندة طلعت. Imagine how the situation would be. Imagine us as a servant. غندة جت تانية الحمد لله في الوقت المناسب. بالضبط. Imagine if we got influence with our service. And we always like we feel joy with the joyful, and we feel sorrow with the people like suffering. But don't let this intrude you. Don't let this make you crabby at home or make you like sad. Why? Back to the same thing. You're just a zero. Why you will take this sorrow with you? Yeah, feel for them. Share with them their feeling. Don't act like so like cold. But in the same time, don't let this intrude you, because again, you're just zero. Leave there, pray for them, and believe strongly in you that there is one who will take care of them. I will do my part as a zero, but he's the one who will do miracles in this situation. So, sympathy, not crabbed. In Deuteronomy, they are saying, in all the work of your hands, so that you surely rejoice. Deuteronomy. Surely rejoice. All the time. Hani was telling us something like 2 weeks ago about this contemplation. Thank all the time. Rejoice all the time. Pray all the time. Thank all the time for the past. Rejoice all the time for what's happening right now. And pray all the time for the coming. Learning, not competing. While you're serving, and with a sense of this zero, you always try to improve yourself. You always try to learn. But don't ever create a spirit of competition between you and another servant. Because again, at the end of the day, have you heard about 2 zeros competing with each other? Which would be like a bigger zero? At the end of the day, both of you zeros. So why would I compete? Why would I claim glory more than my brother or my sister? Learn from others. Learn from others, but don't try to compete with others. Double zero, بالضبط, yes. Last one is modifying, not quitting. Something very common, actually, we hear a lot. Whenever we have some circumstances, we decide to take like 1 year off. Not from the school, from the service. And when you ask why, oh, because I have too much work this year. I can't accommodate this year. I can't commit this year. Back to the same equation. If you know that you're zero, just as a zero, give whatever you have. And instead of of giving 10 hours a week, you will give 2. That's fine. You're still zero. He will do the rest. It will not make any difference if you submit yourself as a lake or submit yourself as a cup, because still the number is still there. So even when someone like, hey, you can modify your role of service. You can say, hey, I'm available only a couple of Sundays. I am available. I can do this. But never quit. Never quit. Because if you quit, that means it reverses the digital equation. It tells that you're doing things on your own. But if you have the real feeling of you are zero, why would I quit? Even if I have 10 minutes to give. Every Sunday, I will still be a soldier in your army. I will still do my service. I will still line up and take the blessing of serving you. Modify, but not quit. One of the most common, famous example about relying on God in the Bible was David. And David, when you read Psalm of David, throughout all his Psalms, trust in God, protected by God, trust in God. David has no really qualification when he started his life as a little boy defeating giant. But he used what he has. The small stones he has, just used it and defeat Goliath. He was realizing that he is zero. Even he was describing himself when he was talking with Saul. Remember how he described himself as what? Dead dog. Dead dog. He told him, like, why you run after me? Why you run after a dead dog? I know that I am zero, but I always put myself next to the one. And guess what? When you read through, every time David deviated, it was the time that he felt he's not zero anymore. When he felt that he has a big army and he relaxed at home, that's when he got defeated. When he felt he's a number. Count my army, I have power, I relax at home, I don't need it anymore. He fall. But as long as he has a feeling of this, I am zero, he stayed protected and he stayed on track. So I am done with this, but all my target from this, I hope it wasn't really complicated, just to have this number planted in each one of us. We are just zero, serving next to the one, and he is doing all the work. And when you have this feeling, you'll have all of this plus more and more and more, you will have it coming naturally from you, because every time you remind yourself of that, every time you have conflict, you have a struggle, you have problem, you have issue even with other servant, remind yourself, I am just a zero, and he is the one who is doing the work. Glory be to him forever. Amen.
We thank God for this, and all of us, we need to use our tools as a zero, especially relying on God's. That one of the great tools, the fasting and the prayer, especially on the Great Lent. It's a very, very great helpful tools that we could use and utilize it for our service. Do you want to take a couple minutes before the second talk, or we could continue? You are fine to continue, مش كده?
5 minutes break. 5 minutes break.
Fine or 5? خلاص 5 minutes only, يعني it's 12:10, 12:15 will start exactly, just to prepare the PowerPoint from Ran. Don't leave. حد ياخد البريك ويزوغ يعني. الترتيلة بتقول don't leave me alone but don't leave the meeting.
Yeah. What, Sophia? Yes, you can put it down. That's fine, Sophia. Yes. Very nice. There's what? There's tools in it? Let me go back.
Could we get everyone from outside to start? 5 minutes is over.
اتفضل يا ابونا العفو.
انت ممكن تجيبها واحد تاني ورا. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen.
Thank you, Abuna. Today we have a little bit of a different topic, I think, than what we're typically used to in the church. It's more of a psychology topic, but it does fit in very well to help us understand ourselves and to help us understand people around us. It's a little bit on the difficult side when it comes to understanding this particular topic. But I think it does make a big difference once we understand it, once we start seeing it, once we start applying it to our lives. It really helps us understand ourselves much better. And it really helps us understand sometimes behaviors that other people do that may upset us. And I think understanding defense mechanisms allow us to, a lot of the times, find excuses for people that maybe otherwise we would struggle to find. So let's start by where this fits in. Um, and before maybe I start with this part, you know, a lot of times we read the Bible, we have a certain understanding of a story. We read it again, we have more of an understanding of a story. We read it again, and then more, and we understand more and more stuff. And because it's the Word of God, it has a characteristic of being alive, which means it applies to every day and age. Which means that if it's a story that could have happened thousands and thousands of years ago, we could still take it in a different context and apply it to our lives today, and it will still be 100% correct. It will still be 100% effective. And I think this topic as a whole really highlights that concept. So we pray this in the Agbeya every single day. And this is the part I want to focus on. O God, absolve, remit, forgive us for our sins, which we did willfully and unwillfully, which we did knowingly and unknowingly, the concealed ones, the manifest ones. O Lord, forgive us for the sake of your holy name, which is called upon us according to your mercy and not according to our sins. التي فعلناها بمعرفة والتي فعلناها بغير معرفة التي فعلناها بإرادتنا والتي فعلناها بغير إرادتنا. So based on this, if we look at sins, we can classify them into 4 different categories. Sins that we do knowingly and willingly. So we know that something's wrong, and we have 100% willpower, we still do that sin. So a lot of the sins that we do on a daily basis fall under this category, which is sins that we do both knowingly and willingly. So we do it with intention, and we do it knowing that this is wrong. So these are sins that are called premeditated sins, like a premeditated murder. Like it's something that it's a sin that you know, that you think about, and then you consciously decide that you're going to do this sin. We all fall into this, and unfortunately a big category of the sins fall into this category. Now there's 2 other categories that are a little bit different, which are sins that we do willingly but unknowingly, and sins that we do knowingly but unwillingly. So let me explain, because I think with examples this might make more sense. So a lot of times we do sins willingly, but we don't know that they're sins, or we don't know that they cause harm, right? So you have a conversation with someone and you end up hurting their feelings, right? So it's a conversation that you do with intent, with will, but you end up inadvertently causing harm. You end up inadvertently hurting someone. You know, we do this with our kids all the time. So the kid cries, the kid throws a tantrum, and because we're embarrassed, we you know, give up or give in and give them what they want. You harm the kid when you do that, obviously, because you feed into their anger, and they're more likely to throw a tantrum next time. But you don't necessarily know that you're doing something wrong. You do it with an intent, but it ends up being something wrong. It ends up being something that harms the kid. And there's so many other examples, mainly of sins that we do that end up hurting people, or situations that we do, or just someone overhears you saying something. We end up in our daily life hurting a lot of people unconsciously or unknowingly. There's still sins. There's still room for improvement. There's still room to understand people's body language and improve on those things. But they're still sins. It's just they're a little bit of a different category than the sins that we do with full intent. Now, how about unwillingly and knowingly? So unwillingly and knowingly are sins that that we do with a full intent, but because of a weak willpower or because of an absence of a willpower. So let me give examples maybe to explain. So when you get peer pressured into doing something, that's a weak will. You know it's wrong, but it's not like the absence of will. It's just it's just a very weak willpower, but you know that they're wrong because all your friends are doing it, and you end up falling into this problem. When you're instructed to sin by an authority figure, like if your dad tells you to do something that is a sin, and you're just, you're a kid and you don't know any better, like he'll tell you to lie or tell you to do this or that. again, there are sins that fall into this category, which are just essentially a weak willpower. Not necessarily completely unwillingly, but just with a weak will, you end up sometimes pressured into doing things that you know are wrong. None of this is our topic today. Our topic are sins that fall into the category of unknowingly and unwillingly. One more time. Sins that fall into category of unknowingly and unwillingly. خطايا بغير إرادتنا وبغير معرفة. So what does that mean? So this leads us to the definition of what defense mechanisms are. So the defense mechanism it's a psychological term, and essentially it's a mental process that is initiated unconsciously to avoid a conscious conflict, a conscious anxiety, or an undesirable feeling. So something happens that provokes anxiety. This thing that happens that provokes anxiety is conscious. You're aware of the anxiety, but unconsciously you start acting in a way that allows you to avoid or deflect or redirect the anxiety. Of course, once we give examples, this will be a little bit more clear. So, the example that I have up here, and this whole lesson is going to be examples, just because otherwise it wouldn't make any sense. It would be useless to do the theoretical part without the examples, because the examples are what really matter. So the whole lesson is going to be full of examples, and I'm sure once we go through all the examples, you guys will have a much better understanding of what defense mechanisms are. But let me give an example here. So, let's say you're in a relationship, you had a breakup, you're very upset about it. It's very normal for people to do what? Just act happy. And they'll say, well, that wasn't a big deal. I'm better off this way. I'm better off without her. I'm better off without him. And the reason why we do this is because the breakup causes a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of stirred up emotions. And sometimes it's difficult to admit that we're upset. It's difficult to actually sit with ourselves and say, yes, I am upset because of the breakup. And it's so much easier to unconsciously just act happy about it or act as if nothing happened, right? So again, these are unconscious sins. People don't sit and say, oh, I'm upset about the breakup, therefore I'm going to act happy. That's not how we think. That's not how our brains think. Our brains think differently. I'm upset about the breakup, but I don't want to be upset. I don't want to admit that I'm sad about it. Therefore, it's just so much easier to act happy. So that's why it's unwillingly and unconsciously. It's not something that you do with intent, and it's not something that you're aware that you're doing unless you read about psychology and understand that what it is, and then start being insightful and understand these things about yourself. And we all do this. Even after we learn about this, we're still going to do these defense mechanisms, just because they're a part of our normal mental process. But it's very important to understand it, and very important to be aware that this is a whole category of sins that we never think about. Go ahead.
Wait, but hiding like sadness, why is that sin?
Okay, so and we're gonna answer this question that you just asked for every single example that we're gonna give. You're not hiding sadness. There's nothing wrong with hiding sadness. This is an unconscious, and again, the example can go both ways. If someone's actually legitimately sad, and they're just trying to hide it, that's a different story. That's not what I'm talking about, and that's not actually what usually happens. What usually happens is that you can't admit to yourself that you're this upset about it, so unconsciously you act happy. If it happens at a conscious decision, that's not what I'm talking about. And I'm going to say that for every single example that I'm going to give today. I have probably about 40 examples that we're going to go through today. And for every single example, if it happens consciously, then it's not a defense mechanism, and it's not what we're discussing today. Does that answer the question? And again, this is a great question, and we'll be asking that same exact question for every example. There is an assumption that there's a subconscious process going on. And there's a scientific debate that happened in the 80s and the 90s. Before that, in psychology, people just assumed that there was an unconscious or subconscious process in our minds going on. And then in the 80s and 90s, they were actually able to prove that experimentally. And I'm not going to go into these details, mainly because I don't understand them that well. But the bottom line is that there were scientific experiments that were done that prove that there is a subconscious process happening in our mind. And that's why we know that these defense mechanisms happen. Another example, being denied for a loan for your dream house that you really wanted to buy. The bank denies you a loan, and then you go and say, well, you know, that wasn't a big day. That was a big house anyway. You know, like it would have been a big hassle to take care of the house, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing that, except the issue is that you are subconsciously, you're just not able to process or deal with the fact that the bank denied you the loan. A more mature way of dealing with it is to sit down and say, yes, I am upset because the bank denied me the loan. There's nothing wrong. Again, I'm not implying there's anything wrong with saying, lil khair, or that was God's intent. There's not a problem, but the problem is that we use that as an excuse to hide our deep sadness because we got denied the loan or denied the opportunity, or because we didn't get accepted into our dream school, so on and so forth, right? A very common one, like you want to apply to a certain school, you don't get accepted, and then you'll be like, well, you know what, this other school has this disadvantages. Again, I'm not saying that this thought process is necessarily wrong. That's normal human behavior. But what I'm saying is there's a more mature way of dealing with it, which is to kind of like sit and understand and realize that you're upset and process those emotions in a more mature way. As we say more and more examples, the relevance of this will become evident. Again, this is not the easiest topic, and it's very different than our kind of standard church topics, but it will make a lot of sense at the end why this is relevant and why it's important. So this is an overview of all the defense mechanisms that we're going to talk about today. They're divided into primitive, immature, neurotic, and mature. The mature ones are kind of really cool, and we'll talk about them. But let's go over the other defense mechanisms that essentially impair a painful aspect of reality that we do not want to be dealing with, or we don't want to deal with. And the idea today is there might be a better way to actually deal with these things than using a defense mechanism. So I'll start with the first one, denial, and a simple definition: avoid being aware of some painful aspect of reality. So there is a painful aspect of your reality or of your life that you're just avoiding being aware of it, that like you just do not want to be aware of it. So a common one is parents' reaction to their child being mentally ill, or let's say someone has a disabled child. Sometimes the parents are just in denial about the whole thing. So like your kid has, let's say, depression or anxiety, and he needs help. He needs to go see a psychiatrist. And as a parent, this is a painful aspect of reality that you refuse to be aware of. You're like, you just can't process it. You just can't imagine that your kid has some sort of mental illness, so it's better for you to just deny it. And again, this happens subconsciously. It's not like my kid is mentally ill, I'm not happy with this, therefore I'm just going to act this. That's not what happens, okay? If that happens, you'd be like a really, mean parent, I guess, but that's not what happens. What happens is a parent in front of them starts seeing that the kid is struggling, the kid has depression, needs to be on antidepressant medications, for example, or let's say the kid had schizophrenia and there's a serious mental issue, but then the parent just cannot process that this is happening to their kid, so unconsciously decides to, I don't even think this is happening, right? So that's the defense mechanism. It's avoid being aware of some painful aspect of reality. Again, this one is a little bit of an extreme example. Another one is when we hear bad news. Very common when you first tell a patient you have cancer, they never process it, especially in the first 5 minutes. It's just, it just doesn't go through because it's just too much of a shock. If you've ever been through hearing about a family member, especially very, very close family member passing away, there's usually this disbelief, usually this denial that goes on in the beginning that you just can't believe that this is happening. Kids' reaction to his parents being divorced or separated. When we do one-on-ones, and I'm sure Abuna runs into this a lot, there may be struggles at home that the kid goes through, that the kid just doesn't want to accept. Like the parents are actually filing for a divorce, and the kid just thinks that they'll still be together, they'll still be the same. So again, just be aware that this is very common, and this is sometimes the way that people deal with a painful aspect of reality. It's just they deny it. Being aware of this is important when you serve, and it's important when you and so this is a common one that we do is, as servants, sometimes we're in denial about the struggles and the problems and the sins that our kids have. Why? Because sometimes if we're fully aware of what happens, we start realizing how much of a problem that is, because we're not doing the one-on-ones that we're supposed to do. We're not doing the visitations. We're not doing a good job just sitting and talking with kids. So sometimes for servants, we're in a little bit of a denial because we don't want to see something bad in our kids, because then that means we're bad servants. Actually, it doesn't. But sometimes that's how we process things. So if you ever find yourself in a way where you're, here's something negative about your kids and you're trying to just minimize it or deny it, know that that's a defense mechanism. And the more mature way of doing it is to actually sit and say, well, yes, what can I do as a servant? What can I do to actually start addressing the problems, the real problems that my kids have? I'm definitely, delinquent on my one-on-ones, on my visitations, and to pray about it so that God can help you actually address those things. So the second defense mechanism is called splitting. Splitting is, seeing people or situations in black and white, all good or all bad. So a lot of us have this defense mechanism where we either think of people as really, really good or really, really bad, and we're not able to process something in the middle. Why? Because let's say you have a friend, and this friend does a situation for you that hurts you. The mature thing is to be like, well, I still love my friend. I still have a good relationship with my friend, but there's just one thing that they're struggling with that ended up hurting me. It's okay, I'm going to forgive. That would be the mature way of dealing with it. The defense mechanism of dealing with it is saying, no, this person's bad. I'm never going to talk to them again. They're absolutely bad, but they did this and this and this, and they helped you in this, this, and this. But in our immaturity, sometimes we tend to see people all good or all bad. Now, we all know that no one's all good and no one's all bad. It's all like shades of gray, right? But as an immature defense mechanism, sometimes it's easier for us to think of people that way to avoid the stress of dealing with someone who is maybe good at certain times, but other times won't be able to help us, or other times just does a little bit of aggressive behavior, so on and so forth. So, and again, this is an unconscious attempt to simplify complex emotions into binary, which is, good or bad. An example of this, we have in our community, we have like a good dose of Egyptian racism. It's a little bit different than racism as we know it. It's like, like, Ya'am da Saidi, or like, just looking at people in a very, just giving them a category and assuming they're going to be difficult to go with. The other one is the Damnufi, or, so on and so forth. There's a lot of, yes, there's a lot of just, yeah. So again, it's a way where you just assume that someone is, it's a prejudice, right? Like you just assume that someone is just going to be all negative based on one attribute. That's what a prejudice is. Again, it's a very immature type of defense mechanism that we have. We see this a lot. Sometimes the kids will be like, the servants or the lessons, they're either really good or really bad, and it's just kind of like an excuse for the kids not to pay attention. There's no lesson or lecture or topic that is 100% good and 100% to the point, and also there isn't any lesson that is going to be 100% bad. But sometimes the kids, it's easier for them to just put servants or lessons into categories instead of like paying attention, for example. And then there's also this, like, we may think of each other as like good servants and bad servants, again, which is a very harmful way of looking at the people at the people in the world around us. We're all organs in the body of Christ. Each one has a function. Each one has something that they're good at, something maybe that they're not as good at. And it's also very important when you're looking at your own talents to be like, okay, well, maybe I'm good at some things, but maybe I'm bad at organizing. Maybe I'm bad at hymns or whatever it may be. Again, when you self-reflect, it's important to see yourself within that, like within those shades of gray, than to see yourself at really, really good at something. Even if you're really, really good at something, there's always going to be room for improvement, right? And sometimes you also say, oh, well, I'm really bad at this. I'm never even going to entertain the idea of, dressing as a deacon, for example. Again, that's a defense mechanism of splitting, where you're putting your talents into categories are either really bad or really, really good. In general, that's not helpful. Projection is another defense mechanism, which is attributing one's own thoughts, feelings, or motive to another person. So, for example, a person who lies to their spouse may accuse their spouse of being a liar. A person who cheats on their spouse will accuse their spouse of being a cheater, for example. So it's, again, one of those immature or primitive defense mechanisms where you have a feeling or you have a problem that is causing you a lot of anxiety, and then you project that into other people. So, for example, you may criticize a servant for not doing a good job preparing a lesson because you yourself don't do a good job of preparing a lesson, or you procrastinate. So a problem that you have, you start, instead of seeing it in yourself, you start seeing it in other people. If a servant struggles with a certain sin, they may unconsciously project those feelings into the kids. So you start talking all your lessons refer to one certain sin that you yourself are struggling with, and you're under the assumption that the kids are struggling with it, again, because it's causing you a lot of anxiety that you're struggling with this sin. Again, it's a little bit of an immature way of dealing with the anxiety of struggling with a certain sin, and instead of just kind of going and confessing about it and acknowledging that you have this, you start projecting it into other people. Kids sometimes project their own negative feelings or thoughts into a biblical character or a story. They'll be like, well, even David committed adultery, so why are you making it a big deal? And then this is another one that I think we all commonly fall into. When you're anxious about giving a lesson because it lacks substance, or you've prepared the lesson and you just have a very, very superficial lesson prepared, for example, and you're anxious about it because deep down you know that this lesson lacks substance. So you end up projecting this into the kids, and you end up kind of accusing the kids of being disruptive, accusing the kids of, lacking substance. They're not paying attention. This is not how you should be in church. And instead of actually focusing on the lesson, you start shifting your focus and projecting this into the kids. And there's other ways to explain this process, but we fall into this a lot, where if you're giving a lesson and you're anxious about a certain part of the lesson, or you can't explain a certain part of the lesson, instead of understanding that that's the problem, then you start yelling at the kids because of the side chatter, and you start kind of telling the kids, Ya Habibi, be quiet, Ya Habibi, اقعد ساكت, this is not how we do at church, and then you forget about the lesson and you lecture them about how to pay attention in church. Sometimes this is, and we all do this, we all fall into this problem. Again, unless we think about it, we would never realize that this is actually a sin or a problem that we're having. Acting out, so I think we all know acting out. Everyone that has kids knows this one very well, right? So the kids throw tantrums all the time, and it's essentially behaving impulsively or engaging in destructive behavior to express emotion. So Sophia gets mad and then she starts stomping on the ground, right? So this is a defense mechanism. There's two defense mechanisms that kids do all the time. This is one of them. But of course, the problem is that we do this as adults too, right? So a person, we see this in the movie all the times, right? Like a person is really angry at a situation and just starts throwing around stuff and, breaking the glass and, so they're acting out, right? So they're expressing their frustration and anxiety in a physical way. Again, expressing anger in a physical way is a sin, but the motive behind it is a defense mechanism. Where it's coming from is a defense mechanism. And again, this is very common anytime you're in class and there's this kid that is just won't sit still and is having problems. A lot of these kids are acting out because of problems at home. In our Egyptian community, a lot of kids get beat up at home. And of course, physical beating up of kids every single day is a big problem. I mean, ever is a big problem, but it's actually pretty common if you're in class and a kid is acting out and they're just kind of all over the place, kind of violent, disruptive, there's a good chance that they get beat up at home. And again, this would be something maybe for the one-on-one conversation. Maybe something, if you feel that it's excessive, would be to let Abuna know so that he can at least maybe talk to the parents or something like that. And so again, this is also kind of a form of acting out when a servant is anxious about the lesson, gives the kids a very hard time because of the minimal side chatter. So again, you look at it as acting out, or you look at it as projection. It's the same idea, is that we're anxious about something and we're almost taking it out on the kids instead. This is maybe, and again, all the examples that I'm going to give from the Bible here are maybe. Like, I don't know if this is true or not. This is just kind of like something that may sound like a defense mechanism, right? So, can someone read for us?
Wait, is it the paragraph?
Is it too far away?
Yeah, I can't see.
Maybe because you're closer.
Which one?
Then the Lord spoke to Moses.
Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the rod, you and your brother Aaron, gather the congregation together, speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Thus you shall bring water for them out of the rock, and give drink to the congregation and their animals." So Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him, and Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, "Hear now, you rebels, must we bring water for you out of the rock?" Then Moses lifted his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation and their animals drank.
So this is, in the Bible, this is essentially the sin that because of it, God wouldn't allow Moses to go to the promised land. And it may look like, so God essentially told Moses to speak at the rock and the water will come flowing. And instead of that, Moses was anxious. He was kind of fed up of the people. And instead of doing that, he started physically hitting the rock twice. So that may be seen as a form of acting out, or maybe seen as a form of just an anxiety transferred into a physical thing. I mean, it doesn't matter how you look at it, but in our teachings, we acknowledge that this is the sin that ended up keeping Moses outside of the promised land. So regression, and that's the other very common defense mechanism that kids do all the time. So reverting to an earlier stage of development or behavior under stress. So essentially, you go back to an earlier stage of development where you didn't have this stress going on, so you going back to that stage alleviates some of the stress. The most common example is when kids are potty trained, and then something problematic happens, like they get a new sibling, and then they regress and start having accidents all the time. So it's the most common example that like psychologists refer to with regression, like something happens at school, and then they just regress, and whatever potty training they learned, it goes away. It's an unconscious attempt to cope with the stress of a situation by regressing to a time when they felt more secure. So, for example, a middle schooler one time was talking to me. I was kind of like, talking to him, "Yani Habibi, you're not paying attention and you're being very disruptive." And he was essentially saying, "Well, when I was in elementary, Sunday school was so much more fun. We had games all the time. We played all the time. We had candy, and he was. So again, this is a little bit of a regression because he's older now. He's in middle school, and Sunday school is not going to be puppet shows and games, and we can do some of it, but we have to start introducing some substance into our lesson. And essentially, he was regressing a little bit by just kind of finding an excuse why not to pay attention. This is another common one that we all run into. You have a big conflict in service. People are mad. There's a lot of problems, and then you go to Abuna and you're like, I don't want to serve anymore. So what are you doing? You're regressing. You're regressing into a stage of development where you weren't a servant back in high school, and you're like, well, I want to retreat to that stage in my development where I felt more secure. So again, a lot of us end up kind of asking Abuna for a year to take a year break from service, or just kind of like, I don't want to serve, or I want to go back to this class. For example, when I was in this class, I didn't have any problems. And essentially the idea is, when you start service, a lot of times you'll get assigned with, older servants that help you out, but maybe now you're on your own and you're running into problems. So again, the correct way, or the mature way of dealing with it is to understand that there's going to be problems in service, and to understand that you're anxious and upset about it, to learn from it, but not to go to Abuna and ask to stop service and take a year break, so on and so forth. Jonah, when he got very stressed and upset in the boat, he's like, throw me into the sea. I'm done with this. And he was almost acting like a little kid. Because some people will explain this part and say Jonah became suicidal. But I think maybe this would be a better explanation, where we just say that, he was just regressing. He was just acting like a little kid because he got very upset and he knew that he disobeyed God. So he regressed into a state like, just throw me in the water. I'm done with this. I'm over all of this. Just throw me in the water. So you can look at this maybe more of a defense mechanism. So passive aggression is a defense mechanism, and this is different. This is different than passive aggressive behavior. So passive aggressive behavior is conscious aggression by being passive, and this is not what I'm talking about. So if someone doesn't like you, so then ignores you and acts like they didn't see you, that's passive aggressive behavior. That is conscious behavior. That is willing and knowing sin, and that's not what I'm talking about. Okay, does that make sense? So what is passive aggression then? What is the defense mechanism of passive aggression? It's expressing aggression in an indirect or passive way, unconsciously. The key here is unconsciously. So an employee is upset with their manager, might agree to a new policy or procedure, but unconsciously fail to follow it or implement it effectively. So we get these compliance emails all the time, and we're supposed to follow them, and are like, yeah, sure, but deep down you're like, I'm gonna just forget about it. Not consciously, because if you did that consciously, you're a bad employee, and you don't see yourself as a bad employee, so you forget about it unconsciously. Does that make sense? So you're almost forgetting about it, but you almost put it in a spot in your brain that then allows you to forget about it, because again, if you consciously forget about it, that's just lying. That's not a defense mechanism. That's not what I'm referring to. And a lot of people, some people will do it consciously, but that's not what I'm referring to here. What I'm referring to here is that when it happens unconsciously, when someone asks you for the lecture notes, or someone asks you for an email, or someone asks you for help, and you deep down feel that, well, they don't deserve it. If they wanted the lecture notes, they should have attended the lecture, but you're a Christian, and you're supposed to help everyone, so you end up just forgetting. Right? You end up putting it in a spot in your brain that then allows you forget. Not, again, if you do this consciously, that is not what I'm referring to here. What I'm referring to here is that when you do this unconsciously, someone asks you for help, and you are just too lazy to do it, but you're a Christian, and you're a servant, and you know that you're supposed to help them. So what do you do instead? You do the passive aggression, and you just forget about it. Okay? Again, forget to share PowerPoint presentation or a good sermon with a fellow servant because you don't like the servant, or they feel that they're being lazy, or someone gives a good lesson and you're kind of feeling, and then you make a comment like, oh no, I was actually sleeping during the lesson. And you do that in a passive way. You don't intentionally want to upset them. But again, we do this unconsciously. I mean, I hope by now kind of the idea of the unconscious nature of these defense mechanisms are a little bit more, we're understanding a little bit more. So displacement, that's a very common defense mechanism, and that's essentially, the example that we always give is, a boss gives the guy a very hard time and yells at the guy goes back home, yells at his wife, has a fight with the wife, and then the wife starts yelling at the kid, and then the kid gets the teddy bear and starts like slapping around the teddy bear, right? So it's a displacement. Everyone has an emotion from, you redirect it from a threatening target to a less threatening target, right? Because the guy is not gonna go fight back with the boss because then he might get fired. Well, what's an easy target? Let me just go fight with my wife. Again, if he does that consciously, that's bad, right? But that's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to unconscious redirection of threatening emotions to a less threatening target. So that's another one, a servant gets talked to Abuna. Abuna takes the servant aside and like, Habibi, what you did was wrong. Please don't do this again. And then the servant, of course, they can't yell back at Abuna, but they're angry and they don't want to just say that I'm wrong. So what do? They go yell back at the kids or have a fight with someone else. That's, again, a form of displacement. If you have something stressful in life and you just randomly pick a fight with someone else, again, that's a displacement. 3 weeks ago, I was at work and this medical scribe was just acting very aggressive, and she was almost like yelling at me, and I'm like, okay. So I usually let things go because I don't. But then a couple of days later, I'm like, I'm probably gonna have to talk to her. This is just not appropriate. So then about a week later, I went and talked to her, and then she started crying, and then she was like, well, I was getting worked up for cancer, مش عارف ايه. And of course, I then start feeling bad. Point that I'm trying to make. If anyone randomly picks a fight with you for no reason, or if anyone shows you aggression for no reason, rest assured they have something very, very stressful happening in their life. And again, the point here is to try to give people a little bit of an excuse when they have these outbursts, when they fight with you out of nowhere. A lot of times there's just something going on that they are not telling you, something at home or something with their health, or someone close by, مثلا, passed away, or let's say someone had a miscarriage, for example. So there's so many things that can cause stress to people that they're just not at liberty to share. And when that happens, they can just randomly pick a fight with you. So know anytime you see that behavior from someone, know that there must be something going on, and maybe try to find an excuse for them. Show empathy, because a lot of times we don't know what's going on, and they may be undergoing that defense mechanism of displacement. Rationalization, so it's another very, very common one, is finding reasons to justify or explain away unacceptable behavior or feelings. So you did something wrong, you did something that wasn't right, and you just find justifications. Now you're not, you're justifying it because you know it's wrong, but instead of admitting that it's wrong and dealing with the fact that you did something that was wrong, instead what you do is rationalize. So, for example, a person who cheated on their, a husband who cheated on their wife will be, well, you didn't meet my emotional needs, or just find some weird rationalization of why he did, such a crazy behavior, right? It's an unconscious attempt to avoid taking responsibility for the actions to reduce the feeling of guilt is what rationalization is. Very common during confession. I'm sure Abuna hears that all the time, but when we sin, we almost follow that with an excuse. And that's why, a lot of times when someone gives you advice about how to confess, it's just say the sin and be silent. You do not need to give excuses. You do not need to justify why the sin happens. But unconsciously, we have this huge need to tell Abuna a 10-minute story before we just give him this little sin. Why? Because we feel guilty about the sin, and we just want to surround it with all what, and we all do this, right? I'm not saying that. Yes.
Need to clarify the reason.
Yes, need to clarify the reason. And why do we feel this need? Because there's a guilt associated with the sin. And when there's a guilt associated with the sin, instead of dealing with it and just say, Abuna, this is what I did, and being quiet, we just, you know, do a 10-minute story and throw the sin either in the middle or at the very end.
But usually we are conscious, not unconscious, because you are focusing on the unconscious.
Correct. So we consciously give the reason,
Yes.
but the motive behind giving the reason is unconscious. So yani, if I ask someone who gives a 10-minute story, why did you give a 10-minute story? They'll be because I wanted to explain it.
But he prepared for it.
Correct. Yes. And I'm not disagreeing, but if you, the point that I'm trying to make is a more mature way of dealing with it is to sit with yourself and say, I sinned, and I don't have an excuse for the sin. And all the story that surrounds the sin is me trying to find an excuse. The conscious, the mature way of dealing with it is to because here's the thing is, you know, so this is a great example, right? So the first sin that was ever committed, I think, was followed by a rationalization. So what did Adam say, right? When God confronted him that he sinned, yeah, he's like, the woman you gave me, right? Like, so he's almost blaming God. He's blaming God for the sin that he did, right? So that's, again, that's the first sin that was ever committed, and the first thing that Adam did was give an extremely silly justification. So like, God, you know, Adam, Habibi, you're lonely. Let me give you someone who's going to help you out. And the first thing that Adam says, it's your fault. You gave me this, right? So it's the idea is like Adam had a lot of guilt that he sinned, and instead of saying I sinned, he started finding excuses and justifying it. And he justified it actually by blaming God. And usually the justifications are volunteered by the person. That's how you know that it's a rationalization, is that, like, you know, usually the person that admits to the problem, like, so for example, I rationalize all the time about, like, how come I prepared my lesson very late and I procrastinated? Well, I was busy, I'm sharif A. So how come I didn't do my visitations? Well, I just had this and had this and had that, right? So we end up rationalizing our problems and our sins in service. And again, the more mature way of dealing with it is to actually admit that we're wrong, and to actually just be mature about it. So repression, I'm not going to go into it a lot because that's more of a psychiatrist type deal. It's pushing unacceptable or painful thoughts and feelings or memories outside of awareness. So the most common example is a kid that gets sexually abused when they were very young and completely forgets about it. It is outside of their conscious memory. طبعا the effects of it are there, and the psychosomatic diseases that come later on in life are there. And sometimes they can do therapy and the kid will end up remembering those things. But again, I don't know that this is really applicable to today's thoughts. It's just that there is a psychological defense mechanism where if someone, especially at a young age, gets an extreme trauma, or someone gets tortured and blocks it out completely, that I don't remember any of the torture, I just know I was there and I got captured and tortured. But again, for our practical purposes, this is more of a psychology thing, not really for us to. Now, suppression, on the other hand, that is more relevant. So that one, avoid thinking or feeling about a particular emotion or situation. So you remember it, you know it happened, but you just avoid thinking about it completely. You avoid thinking about it, and you avoid anything that reminds you of it, and you just block it out completely out of your thought. It's there, and if I remind you, it's not like you forgot. You know it's there, but you just suppress it. So common examples is just, again, a person who gets abused as a child remembers it, but never ever thinks about it, and never ever crosses his mind. They just kind of put it somewhere in their mind where they do not want to ever think about it or discuss it. Again, a person who just broke up may distract themselves with hobbies and try not to think about the breakup. They may it's a conscious attempt to avoid an emotion or a situation and prevent it from becoming overwhelming, so you just distract yourself with someone else. You just like heard bad news, masalan, and then you go pick up a hobby or go do something else to try to suppress it. You know, like you have a college application coming and it's very stressful, and you keep procrastinating. You don't want to do it. You don't want to think about it. You want to just keep it outside because it's so stressful for you. Again, it's not a mature way of dealing with a stressor. And again, maybe sometimes in one-on-one, you might find a little bit of difficulty. Like there are certain topics that kids just don't want to talk about, and know that some part of this may be the suppression. Reaction formation. So expressing the opposite of one's true feelings to hide them or deny them. So there's a certain stressor, a certain feeling that you have, and you're unhappy with this feeling. You're ashamed of this feeling, so you express the opposite, but you express the opposite in a much bigger and much more magnified way. So let's take some examples. So for example, you know, a person, masalan, you're interacting with someone, you have a crush on someone, and instead of admitting that you like that person, you start like being very, very critical, excessively critical of them, because you don't want to admit that you have those feelings towards someone. طبعا the more mature way is to actually admit it and يعني be okay with it. But you know, this is here more for an example where, you know, let's say someone who's not Christian, like someone who you're not gonna start dating, for example. So then you have those feelings and you don't know what to do with the feelings. So then you start really criticizing them and really seeing negative things about them because you have this feeling, and you're not able to deal with those feelings in a mature way. You know, when you maybe have critical thoughts about a servant that you don't like, and then in front of people you're like, oh no, Fulanda, he's a saint. Uncle Ramses, he's a saint. Just kidding. But deep down, he called you out. He called you out when you gave that lesson one time, and he really and you're like, لا Uncle Ramses ده ما حصلش. You know, he's just subconscious صدقني يعني مش it's not conscious. You know, exaggerated flattery to other people can sometimes be a reaction formation where you have these negative feelings towards someone, and instead of just accepting that you have those, because the thing is, like, we know the Sermon on the Mount, right? We want to be good Christians. We want to be loving towards everyone. But the problem is the devil still puts these negative emotions inside each one of us, and sometimes we express them in the form of a reaction formation and in the form of excessive flattery. This is another common one. A Sunday school servant gives a very, 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 very long lesson like today to compensate for lack of substance. Okay, so sometimes you give a lesson and it's not a good lesson. You didn't do a good job in preparing it, and it doesn't have any new information, and you're conscious of that, and you know that. But instead of doing a good job, then you start making the lesson longer and longer and longer, and repeating things again and again and again, because you're compensating for the feeling that this lesson lacks any substance. Does that make sense? Because this is another important one, and unfortunately we all fall into this one, is that we have we didn't do a good job preparing, and then we compensate by just making the lesson longer and getting the kids more bored, and then we start giving them a hard time for not paying attention. So it's like 3 different defense mechanisms in one setting. This may be an example of reaction formation. I don't know. So this is when Nathan confronted David with his sin. Before he confronted him with his sin, he gave him the story of the guy that stole the field, and then so David. This is David's response. So David's anger was greatly aroused against the hypothetical man that Nathan said in the story. And he said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this shall surely die. He had a very, very exaggerated reaction to the story that Nathan was telling him. This may be a form of reaction formation, because he knew that he was sinful and he had this guilt, and he hadn't dealt with the guilt yet. He hadn't repented yet. At this point in the story, he hadn't written Psalm 50 yet, right? So he hadn't went through the repentance, and he hadn't acknowledged. Now, after that, when Nathan told him, no, that's you, then the 2 Samuel explains how he repented. But at this point in time, it might have been just a reaction formation where he heard the story and he just became very, very, very angry, excessively angry because of the guilt feelings that were buried deep down. Again, all the Bible examples that I'm giving, take them just at face value. These are maybe yes, maybe no. Again, anytime we give something from the Bible, we want it to be backed up by the church fathers' sayings, and none of what I'm saying today is actually backed up or referenced. So undoing, an attempt to undo or reverse a previous behavior or thought by engaging in a new behavior or thought that is meant to cancel out or negate the original behavior. So again, very complicated definition, but very simple. A person who has a fight with their friend, next day they bring them a gift or they take them out for lunch. So the mature thing would be to apologize, to acknowledge what you had the fight, to talk about it, to actually apologize. The immature way is to just do something else to undo it. Our practice administrator several months ago made like a big mistake that ended up affecting me, and I had sent her an email 2 months even before, telling her like, be careful, this is gonna happen, and she still did the mistake. And then I send an email and I'm like, خلي عندك دم, like just be careful. And like she knew that she was 100% wrong. There was nothing. So then she never responded to the email. And then 2 days later, she's like, happy birthday, Dr. Faltas. And I mean, she never sends birthday wishes or anything like that. So again, she felt guilty, but instead of actually apologizing, she used this undoing behavior. I think a really good example of undoing in the Bible is when Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather a tumult was rising. He took water, washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. You see it. Was he innocent? No, he wasn't. He gave them Christ, and they crucified Christ. So why was he washing his hand? It was an undoing. It was a defense mechanism that he was too anxious to deal with the crowd, too anxious, too scared that this would result in a rebellion or anything like that. So he just washed his hands just to make himself feel better. It was an unconscious defense mechanism to undo what he did. Again, this may happen in service after uncomfortable, tense interaction with a kid, and you buy them a gift. If you're wrong, if you ever feel that you weren't being, you didn't have a good interaction, please make sure you go and apologize to the kid, because it makes a big difference, and kids will really appreciate you doing that. Do not go and do something else instead. After being mean to a fellow servant, then you tag them on Facebook, or you're just kind of like, hey, let's go out, مش عارف إيه. Again, if you're wrong, say I'm sorry, right? That's the mature way of dealing with it, but unfortunately, sometimes we end up doing this instead. After a tense argument with one of your colleagues, you find yourself extra nice to a different colleague, right? So you have this like tense argument with someone, but you want to prove that yourself that you're a nice person, so you then start being extra nice to other people around you. That might be a form of undoing. Identification, adopting the characteristics or qualities of someone else to cope with feelings of inadequacy or anxiety. A person who feels insecure about their intelligence may try to adopt the mannerism and language of a highly intelligent person. So it's just like someone you see that you look up to, and you start almost imitating them. So you identify with them and you want to be like them. It is thought that being a sports fan to any team is a way of identification. So, well, how good are you at soccer? How good are you at football? Well, I mean, definitely not an athletic or professional level. So then when we identify with these athletes, and when we root for certain teams, or when you're like Ahlawi or Zamalkawi or whatever, that's in psychology, that's a defense mechanism, because you yourself suck at soccer, right? So another common one is like when a deacon sings the priest's part in the liturgy. At home or in the priest, that's maybe a form of identification where you're like, you're غلبان على قدك كده, you're not, and then you're like, oh well, I'm gonna sing the things that Abuna, like Thanksgiving prayer, or in liturgy there are parts that are Abuna, part that are deacon, part for the people, and in general everyone should stick to their own part. But sometimes we try to like identify with, yes, yeah.
White Sefer told us one time the kids were admired too much with a servant who is limping when he's walking.
Yeah.
And all the kids after that walked limping.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that does happen. And to be honest, this defense mechanism is way more common in Egypt and in service in Egypt than it is here. But we still, Marina, sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, so from what I'm understanding, the like unhealthy, unconscious
Correct.
aspect of it is that like I myself don't have a sense of identity, so I'm just like copying
Yes.
what I see.
100%.
So like how is that different than like, oh, I just really admire this person and I want to be more like them? Like is that still healthy?
100% that is still healthy, and great question. Thank you for asking it. So yes, you admire this person, you want to be like them, but you copy the actual good things that they do, not the fact they're limping, not their mannerism, not the way that masalan certain Abuna sings, and you just want to copy the way he does it, right? So there's a little bit of an unhealthy component to identification. You know, again, like you always think of like all these sports fan, you sit, you eat junk food and you drink beer and you watch all these athletes running at like these amazing speeds and you know, that's, again, I'm not implying that we shouldn't watch sports. I'm just saying that sometimes it's an unhealthy identification where, I mean, what you should do is start having a healthy lifestyle, start maybe running a little bit, you know, as opposed to like, you know, sitting, you know, drinking beer and eating junk food, watching athletes compete at a very, very high level. But yes, absolutely, there's nothing wrong, and thanks again for bringing this up. There's nothing wrong with admiring someone, seeing how they are. That's how we all have spiritual fathers. That's how we all have fathers of confession. That's how we all learn from other servants that we admire. Again, it's when you copy their style or copy their mannerism as opposed to copying something of substance or of value that they do. It's what you pick to copy. Again, like the sports fan dressed in the jersey of the team. Yeah, does that answer the question? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So intellectualization is focusing on abstract or intellectual aspects of a situation to avoid dealing with emotions. That one's not as common, but it does happen. So someone gets laid off work. They're very, very upset that they get laid off work, and instead of expressing that they got laid off work, instead they're like, well, the macroeconomic situation of our country here, and all the tech companies have to fire 3% of the workforce in order to get to this productivity, and Habibi, you just got laid off. You know, like another common one is like a doctor who's a little anxious about telling this person that he has cancer and he has 6 months to live, and instead of just dealing with the emotion, he starts explaining to him like on a cellular mechanism level, how did he end up having cancer? You know, like, you know, again, that's another like common example. You know, sometimes, and this is not something common. Sometimes we have this defense mechanism when we're giving a lesson. Like if you're particularly a non-emotional person, and you end up really focusing on the philosophical aspects of a spiritual concept instead of focusing on the emotional aspects and the spiritual aspects. If you, as a kid growing up, criticized your Sunday school servants for being emotional or being spiritual, you might find yourself being very intellectual in your lessons when you grow up because you don't want to admit that you were wrong as a kid, for example. Again, this is not something we see a lot, but just food for thought. Again, it's okay to give a philosophical lesson. It's okay to dive into the history of the church. It's okay to give a lesson that is more intellectual, but make sure that we don't forget about the spiritual and emotional component of a lesson. So we have three remaining ones, or three, I think, or four. And these are called the mature defense mechanisms. And these mature defense mechanisms may not always fall under the category of a sin. Okay, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but they're thought by psychologists to be more mature ways of dealing with emotion. You're still avoiding a head-on conflict with the difficult emotion, and you're diverting it in a more mature way. So humor is one of them. Using humor to cope with a stressful situation. A person who's going through a difficult time may use humor to lighten the mood. Someone who just heard bad news and just kind of not laughs about it hysterically like in Egyptian movies, but just kind of like says something to lighten the mood, or says a little joke to lighten the mood, to be able. And again, we don't necessarily have to look at this as a quote unquote sin, but just as it's, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but just the idea that when you have a problematic emotion that you can deal with, the best way is to, put it on Christ's feet. But again, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with doing this. But let me give some other examples, like an anxious laugh. We see that a lot when people are anxious about a situation. They'll kind of laugh about it. We also see it sometimes in the context of someone who's being critical. Like I'm talking about Uncle Ramses, and I want to say something negative about him. And but instead of saying it, I say it in the form of a joke or bahazzar, or So you use humor to hide the criticism. And that's definitely a sin. That's definitely not something good. And be aware if you ever do this, like don't say something negative as opposed to saying something negative in the context of humor. This, again, I don't know. Therefore, Sarah laughed within herself, saying, after I have grown old, I shall have pleasure, my Lord, being also so old. So this is when the angel of the Lord told Abraham that I'm going to come visit you next year, and you're going to have a kid. Maybe this thought was caused a lot of anxiety to Sarah, like, kid, what are you talking about? Like, I've been dreaming of a kid for so long, and I've 100% given up hope. And so maybe she used that defense mechanism to alleviate some of the anxiety, and that's why she laughed, probably like an anxious type of laugh. And this can happen during one-on-ones when a kid is sharing something uncomfortable with you. They may start kind of joking about it or just integrating a little bit laugh. So know when you hear it and when you see it that person is going through some anxiety, and understand it and be compassionate about it. Altruism, helping others as a way to cope with one's own stress or anxiety. And again, this is considered a mature defense mechanism, not necessarily something bad, but there are situations where this actually can be a problem, and I'll explain here in a second. But let's maybe do the good example first. A person who's going through a difficult time in their life may volunteer at a homeless shelter or help other people to feel good about themselves. And this actually, this is our church teachings. Like, our church teachings are like, if you're running through a difficult time, it's actually better for you to go and help other people. It's actually better for you to go and serve, because that will help you out. So it's not just in psychology, it's in our church teachings, that one of the ways to deal with stress or anxiety is to help other people. That when can this become problematic? So let's actually do another maybe good example. A Sunday school servant who struggled with acceptance as a kid growing up. When they then start serving, they focus on kids that are not getting attention, and that kids that are needing acceptance. So it's a way to deal with a trauma or a struggle that you've had as a kid growing up. So then you become a better servant at looking for those kids, going and sitting with the person at lunch that doesn't have anyone that sits with them, right? So again, that's another good example. So let's use the examples that may be a little bit tricky. It becomes a sin if we avoid dealing with real issues. Like, if you dedicate your life for the climate crisis and saving the planet. Again, there's nothing wrong with saving the planet. There's nothing wrong with recycling. There's nothing wrong about being cognizant of our carbon footprint. But if that's your life mission, sometimes it's a way to get away from serious issues. Sometimes you may have serious issues in your life, and instead of dealing with them, you go and find an altruistic goal, and you dedicate your life to that goal instead of dealing with the real problems. That's when it becomes problems. That's when it becomes a problem. That's when it becomes, quote unquote, as a sin, is that when you're using it to hide something else that you would rather not deal with. If you use service at church to avoid dealing with some other failure in life. Again, there's nothing wrong with, if we have a certain failure in life, to actually serve. That will help us through that failure. But if we're using service as a way to forget completely about some other aspect of life that we're lacking or not doing good with, then that can become a problem. So then we start focusing all our resources, all our attention into service, instead of actually dealing with some other emotional problem that we have, or some other conflict that we have at home that we don't want to address. مثلا, you know, someone that has issues with their siblings or just doesn't get along with the parents and then just doesn't go deal with any of that and uses the church as an escape. Again, these are a little tricky, and these are like, you know, again, you really have to dig down deep to find out if you have a component with that. Like I remember a lot of times, like I'd be like really stressed about studying, and I just like, you know what, I'm just gonna go to Tasbihah instead. Again, there's nothing wrong with going to Tasbihah. There's nothing wrong with going to church. But sometimes you actually have to sit and study. Sometimes you actually have to do your work. And sometimes you use this mature defense mechanism as a way to escape something that you're actually supposed to be doing. So again, I'm not gonna go too much into that because this is really varies from person to person. Easiest thing to do is just talk about it with your father in confession. This is another one when you have an atheist in the society that resorts to being excessively passionate about community service just to kind of, especially, and I'm not talking about agnostic people because those usually don't have problems, but sometimes really hardcore atheists who are like that because of a problem in their life will end up using this altruistic thing by just being compassionate and doing a lot of community service. So this is the last one that we're going to talk about, sublimation, redirecting unacceptable impulses or behaviors into socially acceptable ones. So for example, a person who has a strong aggressive behavior then goes into boxing, right? So instead of like hitting the other kids and getting into trouble, well, you find a sport and you're able to take out all your anger and your emotions in that sport, something like boxing, for example. And that is a sublimation. A lot of these kids, مثلا a kid that gets beat up at home, starts going and beats up the other kids. Well, the mature way to deal with it is go and start learning to box. You'll be able to take out some of this aggression and some of this in a culturally acceptable way. Again, this is considered a mature defense mechanism. An artist who channels their emotions, the emotional pain into art. Again, nothing wrong with that. That's definitely encouraged. A deacon who channels their emotion into singing hymns. Again, nothing wrong with that. It's a way for us to take these non-productive emotions and put them into something spiritual and something that is productive. Now let's take an example here which may be a little tricky. So you feel attracted to someone, and assuming again someone who's not Christian, someone who you know that you're not going to date, right? And then what do you do? So you go and introduce them to a suitable friend, or maybe start mentoring them in a professional way. Right, so again, it's a little tricky, and again, I'm not necessarily saying that this is wrong, but sometimes it's very important to expose those emotions in confession. If you have them, nothing wrong with sublimation per se, but sometimes it's still emotions that need to be exposed in confession, regardless. Again, I'm not talking here about someone who you may actually start dating, because that there's nothing wrong with that. I'm talking about someone who, let's say, is not Christian, and you're not going to be dating them. So then sublimation would be like, okay, well, let me hook you up with a friend. Let me introduce you to someone. Or sometimes people will do this like mentorship. Okay, well, let's maybe do some studying, or I'll explain the lecture to you, so on and so forth. So I want to end by saying a couple of things. Understanding defense mechanisms is not a way so that you can analyze your friends and analyze the people around you. It's a way for you to be able to better yourself. It's a way for you to be able to understand yourself better. But it's also a way to find excuses for other people. The unnecessary anger, kind of the things that people do. It allows you to find excuses to the aggressive behavior that people show towards you on a daily basis. It allows you to understand that a lot of the times this is being done in an unconscious way. And we're all not black and white. We're all somewhere in the middle. So we all should put effort into understanding people around us and understanding ourselves. Also, we need to pour our emotions into Christ. We need to The problem is that we sometimes can't deal with these painful aspects of reality, painful emotions, all these problems that we have, because we're not dealing them in the Christian way. The Christian way is take all these emotions and lay them at the foot of Christ And when you do that, you're not going to have a need to use those defense mechanisms. A sinful woman in town learned that Jesus was eating in the Pharisee's house. So she brought a jar of alabaster, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume, stood behind Jesus at his feet crying. She began to wash his feet with the tears. She dried them with her hair, kissing them many times and rubbing them with a perfume. These are her emotions, right? So the church teaches us that this perfume and these tears and her hair, her quote unquote pridefulness. What do you do with all these feelings? What do you do with all these emotions? The church teaches us that the right place for them is on Christ's feet. So when you struggle with the fact that you might be a little jealous, or you struggle with the fact that maybe you are not like super accepting, or the fact that you have a really anxious situation that you're not going to deal with, this is where you're supposed to put it. You're supposed to acknowledge it. You're supposed to say, yes, I feel this way. But when you're sitting on your own in your room, kind of contemplating, having this quiet time, thinking of your sins and crying at the feet of Christ. And I think this last concept, which is, the closer we get to the true light, the closer we get to Jesus, the more we start seeing our blemishes. And the more we start seeing our blemishes, we're able to deal with them, we're able to take care of them, we're able to confess about them, and then we get closer, and the closer we get, we start seeing more and more sins. We start seeing more and more problems that we have, right? So it's a process that never ends. No one ever reaches a perfection. The closer you get to Christ, the more sins that you're going to see in yourself, and the more there is room for improvement. The last thing I want to say is that any emotions that we have, make sure to expose those emotions in front of your Father of confession, even if they're not sinful emotions, even if they're not. It's important to expose those emotions because it acts like an umbrella. It acts like an insurance policy. It's like, okay, every month I'm going to come to my Father of confession. I'm going to expose those feelings. Therefore, these are not my responsibility anymore. These are God's responsibility. These are Christ's responsibility. And that's why confession is so important in our Coptic church. And glory be to God forever. Amen. But I think we have a workshop.
Break
and
15 minutes. So we're going to come back here exactly 1:45 for the workshop.
$15, okay? I know it will reach to 20 minutes, but 15 is fine, is enough. So you'll be able to go on time. We are behind the schedule, 15 minutes already, so try to be on time, please.